Good evening and welcome to Colorado Decides, a joint production of PBS 12, CBS 4, and the Colorado Sun. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Joining me is John Frank from the Colorado Sun. We kick off our general election season tonight by looking at the major initiatives on November's ballot. Tonight's debate will examine both sides of the ballot issue that would have Colorado joined the National Popular Vote Compact. Joining us for the next 30 minutes are Colorado State Senator Mike Foote in favor of the measure, and former Colorado State Speaker of the House Frank McNulty opposing the measure. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. John, we have limited time, so why don't you get us started?
Wonderful. Mr. Speaker, we'll start with you. This is the first ballot effort to repeal a law here in Colorado since 1932. Why is this issue so important that it demands to be repealed?
Coloradans deserve to know who's going to get their votes for president. And that person should be the winner of the Colorado popular vote, not the winner of the national popular vote. That person should be the candidate who gets the most votes in Colorado, not the most votes in 49 other states plus the District of Columbia. So when this was set out for signature in order to put it on this November's ballot, Republicans, Democrats, unaffiliated, people from all different political parties came out to sign the petition. Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliated carried petitions to put this question on the ballot. And this measure had bipartisan opposition in the Colorado legislature. So it was easy to see with this public support for the movement to put this on the ballot, why it should be challenged and why Coloradans should have a voice in determining whether our votes for president go to a candidate who wins the most votes in 49 other states, or whether our votes for president go to the candidate who wins the most votes here in Colorado.
And Senator Foote, why is this law right for Colorado?
Well, first of all, the fact that we elect our president is something that's relevant to everybody, including all of Coloradans. The president is our most important elected office. And right now, the way that the president is elected favors some voices over others. Frank mentioned the voice of Colorado, and we hear this a lot from the opponents of the national popular vote. The voice of Colorado actually should be every single Coloradan that votes for president. That's not the case right now. Only the Coloradans that vote in the majority are the ones who have their voices heard. Last election in 2016, 1.2 million Coloradans voted for Donald Trump for president. But because 1.3 million Coloradans voted for Hillary Clinton, all those people that voted for Donald Trump, their votes were completely tossed aside. They meant nothing. They translated into zero electoral votes from the state of Colorado. So the national popular vote will actually make sure that every Coloradan is heard. And when enacted by enough states, and the way that we actually elect our president will make sure that every American is heard. One person will actually equal one vote, no matter where that person lives, no matter what the election. And that's the way that it works for every other election, all the way from city council to state legislature to the governor. It doesn't work that way for the president right now, and that's to our detriment. But we want to make sure that everybody's voice matters, every vote counts. One person should equal one vote, and that's what the national popular vote will do.
Let's set up a little bit about what the current law is and what the whole compact is. For folks who may not be familiar with that, Mike, let's go ahead and set up what is the National Popular Vote Compact and what is the current state of affairs due to the legislature's decision?
Yeah, so good question. So our current system that we have is what's called a winner-take-all system. What that means, 48 out of 50 states have this system, including Colorado right now under current law. What that means is whichever candidate wins 50% plus one in the state, they get all of the state's electoral votes. Now, Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution does not mandate the winner-take-all system. It doesn't mandate any system, actually. It gives the states exclusive authority and power to determine how their presidential electors are selected and allocated. And so the national popular vote uses Colorado's Article 2, Section 1 power to make sure that the president that ultimately gets elected is the one that gets the most votes nationwide, is the candidate that actually can appeal to the most voters across the country, including in Colorado. And that's what we wrote into the law. So you were asking about how it came about in Colorado, I think. In 2019, I was one of the legislative sponsors that ran the bill here in Colorado to join us with the national popular vote. It passed the legislature. Governor Polis signed it. We became one of 16 jurisdictions that were part of the national popular vote interstate agreement. I say 16 jurisdictions because it's 15 states plus Washington, D.C. So it's a coalition of small states, medium-sized states like Colorado, and large states, anywhere from Rhode Island all the way up to Illinois, and many states in between. And so it's not in effect now. It won't take effect until sometime after the 2020 election because there's not enough states that have signed on to it at this point in time. There's states that represent 196 electoral college votes that have signed on to it. You need to have 270 electoral college votes in order for it to go into effect. So we're 2/3 of the way there, but it won't take effect for the 2020 election.
So Frank, the motivation to actually put something on the ballot to go against something that's already been passed in the legislature, how did that come about? And specifically, if it's still somewhat of a long shot, this even come into reality, a lot of resources are going to go into fighting something that may not even be relevant if the compact really ever goes to fruition. So why such an effort to fight it at this point?
The idea that Colorado's votes could be tossed into some bucket with major metropolitan areas across the country is what makes this relevant. The fact that we have clout on national issues because of the way we allocate our electoral college votes matters. And the fact that the legislature was willing to take this clout away from Colorado and toss it into a bucket with states like California and New York, major metropolitan areas like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Chicago, that matters a great deal. Coloradans want to be able to and ought to be able to decide who gets our votes for president, not some big city on the West Coast or some large state on the East Coast.
John?
Senator Foote, one of the main criticisms of the national popular vote is the idea that it would make Colorado less consequential. We have 9 electoral votes, far fewer than California, Texas, Florida, New York. Would presidential candidates even have to come here? Would they compete for Colorado voters' attention and votes if, as the speaker suggests, our electoral college 9 votes are just in a larger bucket?
Well, I'm glad you asked. There's a number of things that I can say to that. First of all, what determines whether or not a state is visited or that the presidential candidates care about the state is not its size. It's whether or not the state is competitive, a so-called swing state or a battleground state. And Colorado was that at some point in time. It's not that anymore. So Colorado, now that we're not a competitive state, according to the presidential candidates themselves, we're not getting that kind of attention that we used to get. And it's not just exclusive to us. Actually, the vast majority of states and those voters do not get any attention from the presidential candidates. I mean, I'm not sure if any of us could name, I know I can't name, the last time a presidential candidate visited a small state like Montana during the general election, or Idaho, or Rhode Island, or Delaware. It doesn't have to be a red state or blue state. It's just whether or not they're a competitive state. So it doesn't really matter what your size is. Some of the biggest states, the presidential candidates don't poll, they don't organize, they don't spend money, they don't visit, because they're not competitive states. And the same goes for small states and medium-sized states like Colorado. So that's important to recognize. And as a matter of fact, there's only really a half dozen, maybe 8 on a good day, states that are considered to be competitive states during this cycle. I want to address a little bit of the issue about the California and New York argument, because we hear that a lot from the opponents of this idea of one person, one vote. So first of all, it is true that California has more people than we do. I think that's pretty easy to acknowledge. We also know that they have more electors, but there's nothing about, that's in the current system, but there's nothing about the national popular vote that will make that a wider disparity. That stays the same. And usually when people say California and New York will determine the president under a national popular vote, it's really code for saying a Democratic candidate's always going to win. And when you look at the math and you look at the numbers, it just does not add up. Take the top 5 states, California, Texas, Florida, and then New York and Pennsylvania. Those are the top 5 states in those order. If you add up all the votes for president, it splits almost virtually down the middle between Republican and Democrat. So that's 50-50 in those top 5 states. So if you're worried about the smaller states and the voters in the smaller states being ignored, you should actually be more worried about the current system. Because under the current system, one candidate, if they ran the table on the top 11 states, just 50% plus one, they would win the election, regardless of what the other 39 states did. Under a national popular vote, actually they would have to get 2/3 of the vote in all of those top 11 states in order to win the election. So again, if you're concerned about the smaller states, Colorado's number 21, so we're not exactly a small state. But if you are concerned about the smaller states, you should be much more concerned about the current system than what a national popular vote would bring.
And Mr. Speaker, what's wrong with the idea that everyone's vote counts the same? The idea that whether you're supporting the Democrat or Republican ticket, that one extra vote could make a difference at the national level, which is what could happen if this system were to take effect.
The way that we elect our president is unique, and I think Senator Foote addressed this in an earlier comment, but it's important. It's important because it forces presidential candidates to travel across the country. Battleground states shift from election to election, from cycle to cycle, but the bottom line is they're always different places within the United States, so you don't have political power aggregating in just a few states along the coasts where most of the people live. Under the national popular vote, if 113 were to pass, you would see an aggregation of political power in large cities, states that have large populations, and the rest of the United States would be left out in the cold. Under the current system, we have presidential candidates who come to Colorado, and they don't just do a whistle stop in Denver, but they travel to Greeley and to Pueblo, to Colorado Springs. They go across the Continental Divide to hold meetings in Grand Junction and rallies in Grand Junction. That's under the current system. If we go with the national popular vote agreement, that goes away. There's absolutely no reason for a presidential candidate to visit Pueblo or to visit Colorado Springs or Greeley or Denver or Fort Collins or Grand Junction. All they need to do is go to Los Angeles, buy up a bunch of media in Los Angeles, go to Atlanta, buy up a bunch of media in Atlanta, and they wouldn't even have to address the middle of the country, the Rocky Mountain states where Colorado sits. We wouldn't even be a part of the game under the National Popular Vote Agreement.
So John, or Dominic, if I could jump in here. So first of all, the only reason that we had presidential candidates visit us was when we were a swing state. We're not a swing state now. There's no partisan or nonpartisan analyst that acknowledges or that thinks that we're a swing state at this point in time, or a competitive state, just to put it that way. President Obama visited Colorado 17 times during his first term of office. President Trump has visited us twice. Once was an Air Force Academy commencement ceremony, and once was back in February when it was kind of a thank you to Senator Gardner for the impeachment acquittal vote. But that's it. Joe Biden has not visited Colorado. And you look also at the advertising.
Joe Biden hasn't visited any place.
And if you look at the advertising money for the candidates, it's the same thing. It focuses on just a couple of states. There's no wide coalition. The coalition that they have to build is Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona. That's 5 states. They have to win 3 of 5. That's what they have to do. That's the coalition they're building. Those are the voters they're going after. Colorado is not part of that. And if I could also talk a little bit about the big city versus the other parts of the country. This won't take too long because, again, I go back to the math. 18% of our population lives in our top 100 cities. 18%. 18% of our population also happens to live in the rural areas. Nobody, I think, in this room would make the argument that under a national popular vote, the presidential candidates will just focus on the 18% of the people that live in rural areas. That would be a losing formula. Similarly, you wouldn't just focus on the 18% that live in the top 100 cities. Under a national popular vote, you actually have to focus on all Americans across the country, regardless of what state they live in, red or blue, big or small, and you have to get the most popular votes to win under a national popular vote, unlike the current system.
Let me jump in here with some questions. We have our good friends with the Academy for Lifelong Learning. They offer a variety of classes that get into the Electoral College, the framers, the Constitution. So they want to offer each side of this a question. Mike, I'm going to start with you. The framers were careful to note that pure democracies in past history had significant failures, which motivated them to draw up a republic, not a direct democracy. Does the National Popular Vote Compact destroy the idea of electing the president via a republic in favor of direct democracy, and thereby forgetting the concerns of the framers of the Constitution?
Good question. I'll just say to whoever wrote that, the answer is no. The national popular vote does not change anything about the fact that we're a republic. The nature of a republic is that we elect representatives to represent us, and that's what we do with the president now. The entire country. You have to look at the presidential election as an election amongst all Americans, because the president and the vice president are the only office holders that actually represent the entire country. So under a national popular vote, it's the same thing. We elect the president in order to represent all of us. So the nature of the republic has not changed. We really are a democracy and a republic, and more accurately described as a democratic republic. We have elements of both. We have voting. In Colorado, of course, we have the Tabor Amendment, which is direct democracy, and we also elect our representatives as a republic as well. Same goes for the country of the United States. So the national popular vote does not change anything about that.
Frank, you're off the hook on this one either from the Academy. Perhaps the idea of the Electoral College made sense in 1790 to the framers when only a certain kind of citizen could vote. But now that we've extended the franchise to every adult citizen in the United States, how does it make sense today that not every vote should count?
Some of the same issues exist today that existed when our nation was founded. One of the most important being we can't have political power accumulating in a small number of highly populated states. What the founders knew was that America was this great, vast country that had a great deal of promise. And to set all of that power in a highly populated state would accumulate so much of those decisions that it would leave farmers, ranchers out in the cold, and they wouldn't be a part of that decision-making process. So the rural areas did end up having a say, and those are the same issues that we face today. So the question we have before us is Colorado has all of these unique interests. The Colorado River Basin, we are constantly doing battle with water-thirsty Southern California. That policy issue matters to us. And so presidential candidates need to address that when they come to our state. And those are the candidates who have that dialogue, who usually end up getting the most votes in Colorado. And those are the folks who should be, those candidates are the ones who should get Colorado's votes for president.
John?
Senator Foote, what would this mean for underserved populations in Colorado? What would the national popular vote do to help give others a voice? And do you consider the current electoral college system part of systemic racism?
Well, I think what it would mean is that those historically disadvantaged communities would actually have a voice. They would actually be listened to. And now that Colorado is not a competitive state, and as a matter of fact, states that are competitive states are usually competitive for maybe 3 cycles, which we were, but we're not anymore. So there's no reason for presidential candidates to listen to historically disadvantaged communities. There's no reason for them to campaign to issues that they care about. In Colorado, there's no reason for them to care at all about what those communities think. And that's not just Colorado. Colorado is one of probably 40 states where that actually applies. Under a national popular vote, presidential candidates have to pay attention to all communities across the country in order to patch together their majority vote of the popular vote if they are to win. So they have to speak to historically disadvantaged communities, for example. They have to campaign to those communities. They can't just take those votes for granted. You know, under the current system, 69% of African American voters and 76% of Latinx voters live in flyover states, not competitive states. That's a huge, huge number. Presidential candidates don't have to speak to them in those states, the 76% of Latinx voters in their communities and their concerns, because they know that the state's either going to go red or blue. Under a national popular vote, both candidates would actually have to speak to those communities because they have to compete. They would actually compete for those votes, and not just the historically disadvantaged communities, but all communities, because every voter would have a voice, because when one person really equals one vote, everybody has to have a voice that the presidential campaigns listen to.
And is that part of a systemic racism or here in America?
Well, certainly my view, my personal view, is that I think the founders bestowed upon us a very important document, and a really historic document, a forward-looking document, but it was a product of the time, and it wasn't perfect. However, in that document, there were seeds of ways to improve the document. Being able to speak out and protest, pass laws through Congress, through state legislatures, federalism, amendments, all those processes were put into that document. So I wouldn't sit here and say that the document was perfect, Certainly, I don't think it was. It was a very important and forward-looking document, but it has been improved over the course of time. Of course, women's suffrage, even though it took 72 years for that to happen, the civil rights movement, all these things that's still going on, all of these things have happened, and they're very important. Many of them are about expansion of voting rights, and that's exactly what the national popular vote does too. It's just another step to make sure that people's voices are heard all across the country. So not perfect at the beginning, we're getting better, and the national popular vote can help us do that.
Mr. Speaker, the same question for you.
When we looked at bringing this challenge to the bill that the legislature had passed, one of the questions that we asked ourselves was, does this matter? Does this matter enough to mobilize the resources to go out and visit with our fellow Coloradans to put it on the ballot? And many, many people said yes. Over 2,000 people carried petitions to put this on the ballot. As we've heard before, Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliateds did the same thing. So there was a value in doing that. And I think that value underscores everything that we talk about when it comes to our form of government, when it comes to how that interacts with the state of Colorado. And I understand Senator Foote's concern with Republicans and Democrats in California or New York, Democrats and unaffiliated here in Colorado, and how their voice can be heard on these national issues. The way that we have it now is an important check against the aggregation of political power. Big decisions being made by very few people. The way that we have, the way that we elect our president allows Colorado a voice, and though Senator Foote keeps throwing out the term that Colorado is not competitive, it's simply not true. Colorado is a competitive state. It's competitive for a reason. It has been competitive for a reason. It's competitive not just because of our geographic diversity, but because of the diversity of our people. And that allows us to think about these issues, to react to these issues, and to provide important input in the issues. So I think all of these things, when you take it together, you start to see why folks should vote no on 113.
Let me actually have a quick follow-up on that, Frank, because when was the last time a vote for the Republican presidential candidate in Colorado actually went toward an electoral college elector from Colorado that voted for that nominee?
Man, I'll tell you, you're going to have to go through that one more time.
When was the last time a Republican vote for a Republican candidate for president counted? Because in Colorado, Barack Obama won in 2008, and then 2012, and then Hillary Clinton won in 2016. My memory is escaping me. I think George Bush may have won in 2004. Yeah. But so using that same argument, a Republican vote hasn't counted in Colorado because those electors still went to the Democratic nominee for 12 years at least.
The important thing is that these candidates came to Colorado. I'm not here to advocate for Republicans. I'm not here to advocate for Democrats. I'm here to advocate for the state of Colorado. And having those candidates come to Colorado, President Obama holding his acceptance speech here in 2008, that's a really big deal for our state. If we go with the national popular vote agreement, all of that goes away. It disappears into the ether because Colorado just becomes background noise with our 1.8% of the total population of the United States. And I think one thing that I'll remind Senator Foote of is John Hickenlooper barely had a majority vote when he was elected governor, didn't even reach 50% when he ran for re-election. And Senator Cory Gardner was elected to the United States Senate. Coloradans have this very interesting penchant to look at both sides and a willingness to elect Republicans and Democrats to statewide office and to have this thoughtful decision when it comes to electing the President of the United States. I want those candidates to know that Colorado matters and to come here.
We could clearly go on for quite a while on this issue, especially in the studio where we love this kind of an issue. But it is time for our closing statements. Before our debate started, we flipped a coin to see who would have a chance to go first for our 30-second closing statement. Frank, you won the coin toss, or excuse me, Mike won the coin toss. So Frank, you'll go first for your 30-second closing statement.
We anticipate a different outcome in November. Thank you for hosting us here tonight. Senator Foote, thank you for participating in this debate. We know that's important, and we appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and to visit with Coloradans. The bottom line is Colorado's voice matters, and Coloradans' votes matter. Votes for president ought to go to the candidate who receives the most votes in Colorado, not the candidate who receives the most votes in 49 other states. Coloradans have a unique perspective on issues, and it matters when it comes to water, healthcare, transportation. All of these policy issues will be decided by who comes to Colorado and the conversations that we have with them. If we adopt 113, that voice goes to larger, more populous states like California and New York. If we vote no on 113, our voice and our votes stay with the candidate who receives the most votes in Colorado, and that's the way that it should be. I ask you to vote no on 113.
Mike, it's time for your 30-second closing statement.
Yeah, thank you, Dominic, and thanks to everyone else in this debate as well. I do appreciate the opportunity. I guess going into the closing statement, I'd like to quote the late Congressman John Lewis, the congressman from Georgia, the civil rights icon that recently passed away. What he said about the vote was that the right to vote is precious and almost sacred, and we should ensure that every vote and every voter is counted. And that's exactly what the national popular vote would do. If you agree with the concept that one person should equal one vote, no matter where the voter lives, in Colorado or elsewhere, if you agree with that concept, if you agree that the presidential candidate that gets the most popular votes throughout the country should actually win the election, just like any other election that we have, the most votes should win. If you think also that the presidential candidate should campaign throughout the country and also Colorado, which they aren't now because we're not considered to be a competitive state, just
wrap up.
Follow the money, then you should be a yes on Proposition 113, and we would ask for your yes vote.
Well, that is all the time we have for this episode of Colorado Decides and our look at the national popular vote ballot issue. I'd like to thank our issue representatives, of course, Senator Mike Foote and former Speaker Frank McNulty, and my fellow panelist, John Frank from the Colorado Sun. If you'd like to find out more information about any of these issues in the general election, please feel free to go to our websites. Of course, we have pbs12.org, cbsdenver.com, and thecoloradosun.com. Please stay tuned for our second debate looking at the Wolf reintroduction ballot measure. Next week, we have a great double feature. At 7 p.m., we'll host a debate about the proposal for voter approval on fees. And at 7:30, we'll take a look at the effort to repeal the Gallagher Amendment. If you are a fiscal issue fan, next Friday is your big night. For everyone here at PBS 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.